The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Chapter 2. One afternoon, a month later, Dorian Gray was reclining in a luxurious armchair in the little library of Lord Henry's house in Curzon Street. It was, in its way, a very charming room, with its high-panelled wainscoting of olive-stained oak, its cream-coloured frieze and ceiling of raised plasterwork, and its brick dust-felt carpet strewn with long fringed silk Persian rugs. On a tiny satinwood table stood a statuette of Clodion, and beside it lay a copy of Les Cent Nouveaux, bound for Margaret of Valois by Clovis Eve, and powdered with the gilt daisies that the Queen had selected for her device. Some large blue china jars filled with parrot tulips were ranged on the mantel-shelf, and through the small leaded panes of the window streamed the apricot-colored light of a summer's day in London. Lord Henry had not come in yet. He was always late on principle, his principle being that punctuality is the thief of time. So the lad was looking rather sulky, as with listless fingers he turned over the pages of an elaborately illustrated edition of Manon Lescaut that he had found in one of the bookcases. The formal, monotonous ticking of the Louis XIV clock annoyed him. Once or twice he thought of going away. At last he heard a light step outside, and the door opened. "How late you are, Harry," he murmured. "I am afraid it is not Harry, Mr. Gray," said a woman's voice. He glanced quickly around and rose to his feet. "I beg your pardon. You thought it was my husband. It is only his wife. You must let me introduce myself. I know you quite well by your photographs. I think my husband has got 27 of them." "Not 27, Lady Henry." "Well, 26, then. And I saw you with him the other night at the opera." She laughed nervously as she spoke, and watched him with her vague forget-me-not eyes. She was a curious woman, whose dresses always looked as if they had been designed in a rage and put on in a tempest. She was always in love with somebody, and, as her passion was never returned, she had kept all her illusions. She tried to look picturesque, but only succeeded in being untidy. Her name was Victoria, and she had a perfect mania for going to church. That was at Lohengrin, Lady Henry, I think? "Yes, it was at dear Lohengrin. I like Wagner's music much better than any other music. It is so loud that one can talk the whole time, without people hearing what one says. That is a great advantage. Don't you think so, Mr. Gray?" The same nervous staccato laugh broke from her thin lips, and her fingers began to play with a long paper knife. Dorian smiled and shook his head. "I'm afraid I don't think so, Lady Henry. I never talk during music, at least during good music. If one hears bad music, it is one's duty to drown it by conversation." "Ah, that is one of Harry's views, isn't it, Mr. Gray? But you must not think I don't like good music. I adore it, but I am afraid of it. It makes me too romantic. I've simply worshipped pianists. 2 at a time, sometimes. I don't know what it is about them. Perhaps it is that they are foreigners. They all are, aren't they? Even those that are born in England become foreigners after a time, don't they? It is so clever of them. Such a compliment to art. Makes it quite cosmopolitan, doesn't it? You've never been to any of my parties, have you, Mr. Gray? You must come. I can't afford orchids, but I spare no expense in foreigners. They make one's rooms look so picturesque. Ah, but here is Harry. Harry, I came in to look for you, to ask you something. I forget what it was, and I found Mr. Gray here. But we've had such a pleasant chat about music. We have quite the same views." No, I think our views are quite different, but he has been most pleasant. I am so glad I've seen him." "I am charmed, my love, quite charmed," said Lord Henry, elevating his dark crescent-shaped eyebrows, and looking at them both with an amused smile. "So sorry I am late, Dorian. I went to look after a piece of old brocade in Wardour Street. and had to bargain for hours for it. Nowadays, people know the price of everything and the value of nothing. "I'm afraid I must be going," exclaimed Lady Henry, after an awkward silence, with her silly sudden laugh. "I have promised to drive with the Duchess. Good-bye, Mr. Gray." "Good-bye, Harry. You are dining out, I suppose." "So am I. Perhaps I shall see you at Lady Thornbury's." "I dare say, my dear," said Lord Henry, shutting the door behind her as she flitted out of the room, looking like a bird of paradise that had been out in the rain, and leaving a faint odour of patchouli behind her. Then he shook hands with Dorian Gray, lit a cigarette, and flung himself down on the sofa. "Never marry a woman with straw-coloured hair, Dorian," he said, after a few puffs. "Why, Harry?" "Because they are so sentimental." "But I like sentimental people." "Never marry at all, Dorian. Men marry because they are tired, women because they are curious. Both are disappointed." "I don't think I'm likely to marry, Harry. I'm too much in love." "This is one of your aphorisms." "I'm putting it into practice, as I do everything you say." "Whom are you in love with?" said Lord Henry, looking at him with a curious smile. "With an actress," said Dorian Gray, blushing. Lord Henry shrugged his shoulders. "That is a rather commonplace debut," he murmured. "You would not say so if you saw her, Harry. Who is she?" "Her name is Sybil Vane." "Never heard of her." "No one has. People will some day, however. She is a genius." "My dear boy, no woman is a genius. Women are a decorative sex. They never have anything to say, but they say it charmingly. They represent the triumph of matter over mind, just as men represent the triumph of mind over morals. There are only two kinds of women, the plain and the colored. The plain women are very useful. If you want to gain a reputation for respectability, you have merely to take them down to supper. The other women are very charming. They commit one mistake, however. They paint in order to try to look young. Our grandmothers painted in order to try to talk brilliantly. Rouge and esprit used to go together. That has all gone out now. As long as a woman can look 10 years younger than her own daughter, she is perfectly satisfied. As for conversation, there are only 5 women in London worth talking to, and 2 of these can't be admitted into decent society. However, tell me about your genius. How long have you known her?" "About 3 weeks. Not so much. About 2 weeks and 2 days. How did you come across her?" "I will tell you, Harry, but you mustn't be unsympathetic about it. After all, it never would have happened if I had not met you. You filled me with a wild desire to know everything about life. For days after I met you, something seemed to throb in my veins. As I lounged in the park or strolled down Piccadilly, I used to look at everyone who passed me and wonder with a mad curiosity what sort of lives they led. Some of them fascinated me, others filled me with terror. There was exquisite poison in the air. I had a passion for sensations. One evening, about 7 o'clock, I determined to go out in search of some adventure. I felt that this grey, monstrous London of ours, with its myriads of people, its splendid sinners, and its sordid sins, as you once said, must have something in store for me. I fancied 1,000 things. The mere danger gave me a sense of delight. I remember what you had said to me on that wonderful night when we first dined together about the search for beauty being the poisonous secret of life. I don't know what I expected, but I went out and wandered eastward, soon losing my way in a labyrinth of grimy streets and black grassless squares. About 8:30, I passed by a little third-rate theatre with a great flaring gas jets and gaudy playbills. A hideous Jew in the most amazing waistcoat I've ever beheld in my life was standing at the entrance, smoking a vile cigar. He had greasy ringlets and an enormous diamond blazed in the center of a soiled shirt. "Have a box, my lord," he said when he saw me. and he took off his hat with an act of gorgeous civility. There was something about him, Harry, that amused me. He was such a monster. You will laugh at me, I know, but I really went in and paid a whole guinea for the stage box. To the present day, I can't make out why I did so. And yet if I hadn't, oh, my dear Harry, if I hadn't, I would have missed the greatest romance of my life. I see you are laughing. It is horrid of you. I am not laughing, Dorian. At least I'm not laughing at you. But you should not say the greatest romance of your life. You should say the first romance of your life. You will always be loved, and you will always be in love with love. There are exquisite things in store for you. This is merely the beginning. Do you think my nature so shallow? Cried Dorian Gray angrily. No. I think your nature so deep. How do you mean? My dear boy, people only love once in their lives are really shallow people. What they call their loyalty and their fidelity, I call either the lethargy of custom or the lack of imagination. Faithlessness is to the emotional life what consistency is to the intellectual life. Simply a confession of failure. But I don't want to interrupt you. Go on with your story. Well, I found myself seated in a horrid little private box with a vulgar drop scene staring me in the face. I looked out behind the curtain and surveyed the house. It was a tawdry affair, all cupids and cornucopias like a third-rate wedding cake. The gallery and pit were very full, but the 2 rows of dingy stalls were quite empty, and there was hardly a person in what I suppose they called the dress circle. Women went about with oranges and ginger beer, and there was a terrible consumption of nuts going on. It must have been just like the palmy days of British drama. Just like, I should fancy, and very horrid. I began to wonder what on earth I should do when I caught sight of the playbill. What do you think the play was, Harry? I should think, The Idiot Boy, or Dumb but Innocent. Our fathers used to like that sort of piece. I believe the longer I live, Dorian, the more keenly I feel that whatever was good for our fathers is not good enough for us. In art, as in politics, les grands prêts ont toujours tort. This play was good enough for us, Harry. It was Romeo and Juliet. I must admit I was rather annoyed at the idea of seeing Shakespeare done in such a wretched hole of a place. Still, I felt interested in a sort of way. At any rate, I determined to wait for the first act. There was a dreadful orchestra, presided over by a young Jew who sat at a cracked piano that nearly drove me away. But at last the drop scene was drawn up and the play began. Romeo was a stout elderly gentleman with corked eyebrows, a husky tragedy voice, and a figure like a beer barrel. Mercutio was almost as bad. He was played by the low comedian who had introduced gags of his own and went on most familiar terms with the pit. They were as grotesque as the scenery, and that looked as if it had come out of a pantomime of 50 years ago. But Juliet? Harry, imagine a girl hardly 17 years of age, with a little flower-like face, a small Greek head with plaited coils of dark brown hair, eyes that were violet wells of passion, lips that were like the petals of a rose. She was the loveliest thing I'd ever seen in my life. You said to me once that pathos left you unmoved, but that beauty, mere beauty, could fill your eyes with tears. Oh, I tell you, Harry, I could hardly see this girl for the mist of tears that came across me. And her voice, oh, I never heard such a voice. It was very low at first, with deep, mellow notes that seemed to fall singly upon one's ear. Then it became a little louder and sounded like a flute or a distant hautbois. In the garden scene it had all the tremulous ecstasy that one hears just before dawn when nightingales are singing. There were moments later on when it had the wild passion of violins. You know how a voice can stir one. Your voice and the voice of Sybil Vane are two things that I shall never forget. When I close my eyes, I hear them, and each one of them is saying something different. I don't know which to follow. Why should I not love her? Harry, I do love her. She is everything to me in life. Night after night I go to see her play. One evening she is Rosalind, the next she is Imogen. I have seen her die in the gloom of an Italian tomb, sucking the poison from her lover's lips. I have watched her wandering through the forest of Arden, disguised as a pretty boy in hose and doublet and dainty cap. She has been mad, and has come into the presence of a guilty king, and has given him rue to wear with bitter herbs to taste of. She has been innocent, and the black hands of jealousy has crushed her reed-like throat. I have seen her in every age and in every costume. Ordinary women never appeal to one's imagination. They are limited to the century. No glamour ever transfigures them. One knows their minds as easily as one knows their bonnets. One can always find them. There is no mystery in one of them. They ride in the park in the morning and chatter at tea parties in the afternoon. They have the stereotyped smile in their fashionable manner. They are quite obvious. But an actress? How different an actress is. Why didn't you tell me that the only thing worth loving is an actress? Because I've loved so many of them, Dorian. Oh, yes, horrid people with dyed hair and painted faces. Don't run down dyed hair and painted faces. There's an extraordinary charm in them sometimes. I wish now I had not told you about Sybil Vane. You could not have helped telling me, Dorian. All through your life, you will tell me everything you do. Yes, Harry, I believe that is true. I cannot help telling you things. You have a curious influence over me. If I ever did a crime, I would come and confide it to you. You would understand me. People like you, the willful sunbeams of life, don't commit crimes, Dorian. But I am much obliged for the compliment all the same. And now, tell me, reach me the matches like a good boy. Thanks. Tell me, where are your relations with Sybil Vane? Dorian Gray leaped to his feet with flushed cheeks and burning eyes. Harry, Sybil Vane is sacred. It is only the sacred things that are worth touching, Dorian, said Lord Henry, with a strange touch of pathos in his voice. But why should you be annoyed? I suppose she will be yours some day. When one is in love, one always begins by deceiving oneself, and one always ends by deceiving others. That is what the world calls romance. But you know her, at any rate, I suppose. Of course I know her. On the first night I was at the theatre, the horrid old Jew came round to the box after the performance was over, and offered to bring me behind the scenes and introduce me to her. I was furious with him and told him that Juliet had been dead for hundreds of years, and that her body was lying in a marble tube in Verona. I think, from his blank look of amazement, that he thought I had taken too much champagne of something. I am not surprised. I was not surprised either. Then he asked me if I wrote for any of the newspapers. I told him I never even read them. He seemed terribly disappointed in that, and confided to me that all the dramatic critics were in a conspiracy against him, and that they were all to be bought. I believe he was quite right there, but on the other hand, most of them are not at all expensive. Well, he seemed to think they were beyond his means. By this time the lights were being put out in the theatre, and I had to go. He wanted me to try some cigars, which he strongly recommended. I declined. The next night, of course, I arrived at the theatre again. When he saw me, he made a low bow and assured me that I was a patron of art. He was a most offensive brute, though he had an extraordinary passion for Shakespeare. He told me once, with an air of pride, that his 3 bankruptcies were due entirely to the poet, whom he insisted on calling the bard. He seemed to think it a distinction. It was a distinction, my dear Dorian, a great distinction. But when did you first speak to Miss Sybil Vane? The 3rd night. She had been playing Rosalind. I could not help going around. I had thrown her some flowers, and she looked at me. At least I fancied she had. The old Jew was persistent. He seemed determined to bring me behind, so I consented. It was curious, my not wanting to know her, wasn't it? No, I don't think so. Dear Harry, why? I'll tell you some other time. Now I want to know about the girl. Sybil? Oh, she was so shy, so gentle. There is something of a child about her. Her eyes opened wide in exquisite wonder when I told her what I thought of her performance. And she seemed quite unconscious of her power. I think we were both rather nervous. The old Jew stood grinning at the doorway of the dusty green room, making elaborate speeches about us both, while we stood looking at each other like children. He would insist on calling me my lord, so I had assured Sybil that I was not anything of the kind. She said quite simply to me, "You look more like a prince." "'Pon my word, Dorian, Miss Sybil knows how to make compliments. You don't understand her, Harry. She regarded me merely as a person in a play. She knows nothing of life. She lives with her mother, a faded, tired woman who played Lady Capulet in a sort of magenta dressing wrapper on the first night, and it looks as if she'd seen better days. I know that look. It always depresses me. The Jew wanted to tell me her history, but I said it did not interest me. You're quite right. There was always something infinitely mean about other people's tragedies. Sybil is the only thing I care about. What is it to me where she came from? From her little head to her little feet, she is absolutely and entirely divine. I go to see her act every night of my life, and every night she is more marvelous. That is the reason, I suppose, that you will never dine with me now? I thought you must have some curious romance on hand. You have, but it's not quite what I expected. My dear Harry, we either lunch or sup together every day, and I've been to the opera with you several times. You always come dreadfully late. Well, I can't help going to see Sybil play, even if it is only for an act. I get hungry for her presence, and when I think of the wonderful soul that is hidden away in that little ivory body, I am filled with awe. You can dine with me tonight, Dorian, can't you? He shook his head. Tonight she is Imogen, he answered. Tomorrow night she will be Juliet. When is she Sybil Vane? Never. I congratulate you. How horrid you are. She is all the great heroines of the world in one. She is more than an individual. You laugh. But I tell you she has genius. I love her. And I must make her love me. You, who know all the secrets of life, tell me how to charm Sybil Vane to love me. I want to make Romeo jealous. I want the dead lovers of the world to hear our laughter and grow sad. I want a breath of our passion to stir their dust into consciousness, to wake their ashes into pain. My God, Harry, how I worship her!" He was walking up and down the room as he spoke. Hectic spots of red burned on his cheeks. He was terribly excited. Lord Henry watched him with a subtle sense of pleasure. How different he was now from the shy, frightened boy he had met in Basil Hallward's studio. His nature had developed like a flower, had borne blossoms of scarlet flame. Out of its secret hiding-place had crept his soul, and desire had come to meet it on the way. "And what do you propose to do?" said Lord Henry at last. "I want you and Basil to come with me some night and see her act. I've not the slightest fear of the result. You won't be able to refuse to recognize her genius. Then we must get her out of the Jew's hands. She's bound to him for 3 years. At least 2 years and 8 months for the present time. I will have to pay him something, of course, when all that is settled. I will take a West End theatre and bring her out properly. She will make the world as mad as she has made me." "Impossible, dear boy." "Yes, she will. She has not merely art, consummate art instinct in her, but she has personality too. And you have often told me that it is personalities, not principles, that move the age. Well, what night shall we go? Let me see. Today is Tuesday. Let us fix tomorrow. She plays Juliet tomorrow. All right, the Bristol at 8 o'clock, and I will get Basil. Not 8. Hurry, please, 6:30. We must be there before the curtain rises. You must see her in the first act, where she meets Romeo. 6:30? What an hour! It'll be like having a meat tea. However, just as you wish. Shall you see Basil between this and then, or shall I write to him? Dear Basil, I've not laid eyes on him for a week. It is rather horrid of me, as he has sent me my portrait in the most wonderful frame designed by himself. And though I am a little jealous of it for being a whole month younger than I am, I must admit that I delight in it. Perhaps you had better write him. I don't want to see him alone. He says things that annoy me. Lord Henry smiled. He gives you good advice, I suppose. People are always giving away things they need most themselves. You don't mean to say that Basil has got any passion or any romance in him? I don't know whether he has any passion, but he certainly has romance, said Lord Henry with an amused look in his eyes. Has he never let you know that? Never. I must ask him about it. I'm rather surprised to hear it. He is the best of fellows, but he seems to me to be just a bit of a Philistine. Since I've known you, Harry, I have discovered that. Basil, my dear boy, puts everything that is charming in him into his work. The consequence is that he has nothing left for life but his prejudices, his principles, and his common sense. The only artists I have ever known who are personally delightful are bad artists. Good artists give everything to their art, and consequently are perfectly uninteresting in themselves. A great poet, a really great poet, is the most unpoetical of all creatures, but inferior poets are absolutely fascinating. The worse their rhymes are, the more picturesque they look. The mere fact of having published a book of second-rate sonnets makes a man quite irresistible. He lives the poetry that he cannot write. The others write the poetry that they dare not realize. I wonder, is that really so, Harry? Said Dorian Gray, putting some perfume on his handkerchief out of a small gold-topped bottle that stood on the table. It must be, if you say so. And now I must be off. Imogen is waiting for me. And don't forget about tomorrow. Goodbye. As he left the room, Lord Henry's heavy eyelids drooped, and he began to think. Certainly few people had ever interested him so much as Dorian Gray, and yet the lad's mad adoration of someone else caused him not the slightest pang of annoyance or jealousy. He was pleased by it. It made him a more interesting study. He had always been enthralled by the methods of science, but the ordinary subject matter of science had seemed to him trivial and of no import. And so he had begun by vivisecting himself, as he had ended by vivisecting others. Human life. That appeared to him as the one thing worth investigating. There was nothing else of any value compared to it. It was true that as one watched life and its curious crucible of pain and pleasure, one could not wear over one's face a mask of glass, or keep the sulphurous fumes from troubling the brain and making the imagination turbid with monstrous fancies and misshapen dreams. There were poisons so subtle that to know their properties one had to sicken of them. There were maladies so strange that one had to pass through them if one sought to understand their nature. And yet, what a great reward one received! How wonderful the whole world became to one! To note the curious, hard logic of passion, and the emotional, covered life of the intellect, to observe where they met, and where they separated. At one point they became one, and at what point they were at discord, there was a delight in that. What matter was the cost? One could never pay too high a price for any sensation. He was conscious, and the thought brought a gleam of pleasure into his brown agate eyes, that it was through certain words of his, musical words said with musical utterance, that Dorian Gray's soul had turned to this white girl and bowed in worship before her. To a large extent, The lad was his own creation. He had made him premature. That was something. Ordinary people waited till life disclosed to them its secret. But to the few, to the elect, the mysteries of life were revealed before the veil was drawn away. Sometimes this was the effect of art, and chiefly of the art of literature, which dealt immediately with the passions and the intellect. But now and then a complex personality took the place, and assumed the office of art was indeed, in its way, a real work of art, life having its elaborate masterpieces, just as poetry has, or sculpture, or painting. Yes, the lad was premature. He was gathering his harvest while it was yet spring. The pulse and passion of youth were in him, but he was becoming self-conscious. It was delightful to watch him. With his beautiful face and his beautiful soul, he was a thing to wonder at. It was no matter how it all ended, or was destined to end. He was like one of those gracious figures in a pageant or a play, whose joys seem too remote from one, but whose sorrows stir one's sense of beauty, and whose wounds are like red roses. Soul and body, body and soul, how mysterious they were. There was animalism in the soul, and the body had its moments of spirituality. The senses could refine, and the intellect could degrade. Who could say where the fleshly impulse ceased, or the psychical impulse began? How shallow were the arbitrary definitions of ordinary psychologists, and yet how difficult to decide between the claims of the various schools. Was the soul a shadow seated in the house of sin? Or was the body really in the soul, as Giordano Bruno thought? The separation of spirit from matter was a mystery, and the union of spirit with matter was a mystery also. He began to wonder whether we should ever make psychology so absolute a science that each little spring of life should be revealed to us. As it was, we always misunderstood ourselves and rarely understood others. Experience was of no ethical value. It was merely the name we gave to our mistakes. Men had, as a rule, regarded it as a mode of warning, had claimed for it a certain moral efficacy in the formation of character, had praised it as something that taught us what to follow and showed us what to avoid. But there was no motive power in experience. It was as little of an active cause as conscience itself. All that it really demonstrated was that our future would be the same as our past, and that the sin we had done once and with loathing, we would do many times with joy. It was clear to him that the experimental method was only a method by which one could arrive at any scientific analysis of the passions, and certainly Dorian Gray was a subject made to his hand, and seemed to promise rich and fruitful results. His sudden mad love for Sybil was a psychological phenomenon of no small interest. There was no doubt that curiosity had much to do with it, curiosity and the desire for new experiences. Yet it was not a simple, but rather a very complex passion. What there was in it, of the purely sensuous instinct of boyhood, had been transformed by the workings of the imagination, changed into something that seemed to the boy himself to be remote from sense, and was, for that very reason, all the more dangerous. It was the passions about whose origin we deceived ourselves that tyrannized most strongly over us. Our weakest motives were those of whose nature we were conscious. It often happened that when we thought we were experimenting on others, we were really experimenting on ourselves. While Lord Henry sat dreaming of these things, a knock came to the door, and his valet entered, and reminded him it was time to dress for dinner. He got up, looked out onto the street. The sunset had smitten into scarlet gold the upper windows of the houses opposite. The panes glowed like glass of heated metal. The sky above was like a faded rose. He thought of Dorian Gray's young, fiery-colored life and wondered how it was all going to end. When he arrived home, about 12:30, he saw a telegram lying on the hall table. He opened it and found it was from Dorian. It was to tell him that he was engaged to be married to Sybil Vane. "I suppose you have heard the news, Basil?" said Lord Henry on the following evening, as Hallward was shown into a little private room at the Bristol, where dinner had been laid for 3. "No, Harry," answered Hallward, giving his hat and coat to the bowing waiter. "What is it? Nothing about politics, I hope? They don't interest me. There is hardly a single person in the House of Commons worth painting, though many of them would be the better for a little whitewashing." "Dorian Gray is engaged to be married," said Lord Henry, watching him as he spoke. Hallward turned perfectly pale, and a curious look flashed for a moment into his eyes and then passed away, leaving them dull. "Dorian engaged to be married?" he cried. "Impossible! It is perfectly true." "To whom?" "To some little actress or other. I can't believe it. Dorian is far too sensible. Dorian is far too wise not to do foolish things now and then, my dear Basil." "Marriage is hardly a thing that one can do now and then, Harry," said Hallward, smiling. "Except in America. But I didn't say he was married. I said he was engaged to be married. There's a great difference. I have a distinct remembrance of being married, but I have no recollection at all of being engaged. I am inclined to think that I was never engaged. But think of Dorian's birth and position and wealth. It would be absurd for him to marry so much beneath him. If you want him to marry this girl, tell him that, Basil. He is sure to do it then. Whenever a man does a thoroughly stupid thing, it is always for the noblest motives." "I hope the girl is good, Harry. I don't want to see Dorian tied to some vile creature who might degrade his nature and ruin his intellect." "Oh, she is more than good. She is beautiful," murmured Lord Henry, sipping a glass of vermouth and orange bitters. "Dorian says she is beautiful, and he is not often wrong about things of that kind. Your portrait of him has quickened his appreciation of the personal appearance of other people. It has had that excellent effect, among others. We are to see her tonight, if that boy doesn't forget his appointment. But do you approve of it, Harry?" asked Hallward, walking up and down the room and biting his lip. "You can't approve of it, really. It is some silly infatuation." "I never approve or disapprove of anything now. It is an absurd attitude to take towards life. We are not sent into the world to air our moral prejudices. I never take any notice of what common people say, and I never interfere with what charming people do. If a personality infatuates me, whatever the personality chooses to do is absolutely delightful to me. Dorian Gray falls in love with a beautiful girl who acts Shakespeare and proposes to marry her? Why not? If he wedded Messalina, he would be none the less interesting. You know I am not a champion of marriage. The real drawback to marriage is that it makes one unselfish, and unselfish people are colorless. They lack individuality. Still, there are certain temperaments that marriage makes more complex. They retain their egotism and add to it many other egos. They are forced to have more than one life. They become more highly organized. Besides, every experience is of value, and whatever one may say against marriage, it is certainly an experience. I hope that Dorian Gray will make this girl his wife, passionately adore her for 6 months, and then suddenly become fascinated by someone else. He would be a wonderful study." "You don't mean all that, Harry. You know you don't. If Dorian Gray's life was spoiled, no one would be sorrier than yourself. You are much better than you pretend to be." Lord Henry laughed. "The reason we all like to think so well of others is that we are all afraid for ourselves. The basis of optimism is sheer terror. We think that we are generous because we credit our neighbor with those virtues that are likely to benefit ourselves. We praise the banker that we may overdraw our account, and we find good qualities in the highwayman in the hope that he may spare our pockets. I mean everything I have said. I have the greatest contempt for optimism, and as for a spoiled life, no life is spoiled, but one whose growth is arrested. If you want to mar a nature, you merely have to reform it. But here is Dorian himself. He will tell you more than I can. Oh, my dear Harry, my dear Basil, you both must congratulate me, said the boy, throwing off his evening cape with his satin-lined wings and shaking each of his friends by the hand in turn. I have never been so happy. Of course, it is sudden, all really delightful things are, and yet it seems to me to be the one thing I have been looking for all my life. He was flushed with excitement and pleasure, and looked extraordinarily handsome. I hope you will always be very happy, Dorian, said Hallward, but I don't quite forgive you for not letting me know of your engagement. You let Harry know. And I don't forgive you for being late for dinner, broke in Lord Henry, putting his hand on the lad's shoulder and smiling as he spoke. Come, let us sit down and try what the new chef here is like, and then you will tell us how it all came about. There's really not much to tell, cried Dorian as they took their seats at the small round table. What happened was simply this. After I left you yesterday evening, Harry, I had some dinner at that curious Italian restaurant in Rupert Street you introduced me to, and went down afterwards to the theatre. Sybil was playing Rosalind. Of course the scenery was dreadful and the Orlando absurd, but Sybil? Oh, you should have seen her. When she came on in her boy's dress, she was perfectly wonderful. She wore a moss-colored velvet jerkin with cinnamon sleeves, a slim brown cross-gartered hose, a dainty little green cap with a hawk's feather caught jewel, and a hooded cloak lined with dull red. She never seemed to me more exquisite. She had all the delicate grace of that Tanagra figurine that you have in your study, Basil. Her hair clustered round her face like dark leaves round a pale rose. As for her acting, well, you will see her tonight. She is simply a born artist. I sat in the dingy box absolutely enthralled. I forgot I was in London, and in the 19th century I was away with my love in a forest that no man had ever seen. After the performance was over, I went behind and spoke to her. As we were sitting together, suddenly there came a look into her eyes that I had never seen there before. My lips moved towards hers. We kissed each other. I can't describe to you what I felt at that moment. It seemed to me that all my life had been narrowed to one perfect point of rose-colored joy. She trembled all over and shook like a white narcissus. Then she flung herself on her knees and kissed my hands. I feel that I should not tell you all of this, but I can't help it. Of course, our engagement is a dead secret. She has not even told her own mother. I don't know what my guardians will say. Old Radley is sure to be furious. But I don't care. I shall be of age in less than a year, and then I can do what I like. I have been right, Basil, haven't I? To take my love out of poetry and to find my wife in Shakespeare's plays? Lips that Shakespeare taught to speak have whispered their secret in my ear. I have had the arms of Rosalind round me, and kissed Juliet on the mouth. Yes, Dorian, I suppose you were right, said Hallward slowly. Have you seen her today? Asked Lord Henry. Dorian shook his head. I left her in the forest of Arden. I shall find her in an orchard in Verona. Lord Henry sipped his champagne in a meditative manner. At what particular point did you mention the word marriage, Dorian? And what did she say in answer? Perhaps you forgot all about it. My dear Harry, I did not treat it as a business transaction, and I did not make a formal proposal. I told her that I loved her, and she said she was not worthy to be my wife. Not worthy? Why, the whole world is nothing to me compared to her. Women are wonderfully practical, murmured Lord Henry. Much more practical than we are. In situations of that kind, we often forget to say anything about marriage, and they always remind us. Hallward laid his hand upon his arm. "Don't, Harry. You have annoyed Dorian. He is not like other men. He would never bring misery upon anyone. His nature is far too fine for that." Lord Henry looked across the table. "Dorian is never annoyed with me," he answered. "I asked the question for the best reason possible, for the only reason, indeed, that excuses one asking any question. Curiosity. I have a theory that it always happens that women propose to us, and not we who propose to the women, except, of course, in middle-class life. But then the middle classes are not modern." Dorian Gray laughed and tossed his head. "You are quite incorrigible, Harry, but I don't mind. It is impossible to be angry with you. When you see Sybil Vane, you will feel that the man who could wrong her would be a beast without a heart. I cannot understand how anyone can wish to shame what he loves. I love Sybil Vane. I wish to place her on a pedestal of gold and to see the world worship the woman who is mine. What is marriage? An irrevocable vow. And it is an irrevocable vow that I want to take. Her trust makes me faithful. Her belief makes me good. When I am with her, I regret all that you have taught me. I become different from what you have known me to be. I am changed, and the mere touch of Sybil Vane's hands makes me forget you and all your wrong, fascinating, poisonous, delightful theories. You will always like me, Dorian," said Lord Henry. "Will you have some coffee, you fellows? Waiter, bring coffee and fine champagne and some cigarettes. No, don't mind the cigarettes. I have some. Basil, I can't allow you to smoke cigars. You must have a cigarette. A cigarette is a perfect type of a perfect pleasure. It is exquisite, and it leaves one unsatisfied. What more can one want? Yes, Dorian, you will always be fond of me. I represent to you all the sins you have never had the courage to commit." "What nonsense you talk, Harry!" cried Dorian Gray, lighting a cigarette from a fire-breathing silver dragon that the waiter had placed on the table. "Let us go down to the theatre. When you see Sybil, you will have a new ideal of life. She will represent something to you that you have never known." "I have known everything," said Lord Henry, with a sad look in his eyes. "But I am always ready for a new emotion. I'm afraid there is no such thing. For me, at any rate. Still, your wonderful girl may thrill me. I love acting. It is so much more real than life. Let us go. Dorian, you will come with me. I am so sorry, Basil, but there is only room for 2 in the brougham. You must follow us in a hansom." They got up and put on their coats, sipping their coffee standing. Hallward was silent and preoccupied. There was a gloom over him. He could not bear this marriage, and yet it seemed to him to be better than many other things that might have happened. After a few moments, they all passed downstairs. He drove off by himself, as had been arranged, and watched the flashing lights of the little brougham in front of him. A strange sense of loss came over him. He felt that Dorian Gray would never again be to him all that he had been in the past. His eyes darkened, and the crowded, flaring streets became blurred to him. When the cab drew up at the doors of the theatre, it seemed to him that he had grown years older. For some reason or other, the house was crowded that night, and the fat Jew manager who met them at the door was beaming from ear to ear with an oily, tremulous smile. He escorted them to their box with a sort of pompous humility, waving his fat, jeweled hands and talking at the top of his voice. Dorian Gray loathed him more than ever. He felt as if he had come to look for Miranda and had been met by Caliban. Lord Henry, upon the other hand, rather liked him. At least he declared he did, and insisted on shaking him by the hand, and assured him that he was proud to meet a man who had discovered a real genius and gone bankrupt over Shakespeare. Hallward amused himself with watching the faces in the pit. The heat was terribly oppressive, and the huge sunlight flamed like a monstrous dahlia with petals of fire. The youths in the gallery had taken off their coats and waistcoats and hung them over the side. They talked to each other across the theatre and shared their oranges with the tawdry painted girls who sat by them. Some women were laughing in the pit. Their voices were horribly shrill and discordant. The sound of popping corks came from the bar. "What a place to find one's divinity in," said Lord Henry. "Yes," answered Dorian Gray. "It was here I found her, and she is divine and beyond all living things. When she acts, you will forget everything. These common people here, with their coarse faces and brutal gestures, become quite different when she is on the stage. They sit silently and watch her. They weep and laugh as she wills them to. She makes them as responsive as a violin. She spiritualizes them, and one feels that they are of the same flesh and blood as oneself." "Oh, I hope not," murmured Lord Henry, who was scanning the occupants of the gallery through his opera glass. "Don't pay any attention to him, Dorian," said Hallward. "I understand what you mean, and I believe in this girl. Any one you love must be marvelous, and any girl that has the effect you describe must be fine and noble. To spiritualize one's age, that is something worth doing. If this girl can give a soul to those who have lived without one, if she can create the sense of beauty in people whose lives have been sordid and ugly, if she can strip them of their selfishness and lend them tears for sorrows that are not their own, she is worthy of all your adoration, worthy of the adoration of the world. This marriage is quite right. I did not think so at first, but I admit it now. God made Sybil Vane for you. Without her, you would have been incomplete." "Thanks, Basil," answered Dorian Gray, pressing his hand. "I knew that you would understand me. Harry is so cynical, he terrifies me. But here is the orchestra. It is quite dreadful, but it only lasts for about 5 minutes. Then the curtain rises, and you will see the girl to whom I am going to give all my life, to whom I have given everything that is good in me." Quarter of an hour afterwards, amidst the extraordinary turmoil of applause, Sybil Vane stepped onto the stage. Yes, she was certainly lovely to look at, one of the loveliest creatures, Lord Henry thought, that he had ever seen. There was something of the fawn in her shy grace and startled eyes. A faint blush, like the shadow of a rose in a mirror of silver, came to her cheeks as she glanced at the crowded, enthusiastic house. She stepped back a few paces, and her lips seemed to tremble. Basil Hallward leapt to his feet and began to applaud. Dorian Gray sat motionless, gazing on her like a man in a dream. Lord Henry peered through his opera glass, murmuring, "Charming, charming." The scene was the hall of Capulet's house, and Romeo, in his pilgrim's dress, had entered with Mercutio and his friends. The band, such as it was, struck up a few bars of music, and the dance began. Through the crowd of ungainly, shabbily dressed actors, Sybil Vane moved like a creature from a finer world. Her body swayed as she danced, as a plant sways in the water. The curves of her throat were like the curves of a white lily. Her hands seemed to be made of cool ivory. Yet she was curiously listless. She showed no sign of joy when her eyes rested on Romeo, the few lines she had to speak. "Good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much, which manly devotion shows in this, for saints have hands that pilgrim hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss." With the brief dialogue that follows were spoken in thoroughly artificial manner. The voice was exquisite, but from the point of view of tone, it was absolutely false. It was wrong in color. It took away all the life from the verse. It made the passion unreal. Dorian Gray grew pale as he watched her. Neither of his friends dared to say anything to him. She seemed to them to be absolutely incompetent. They were horribly disappointed. Yet they felt that the true test of any Juliet is the balcony scene of the second act. They waited for that. If she failed there was nothing in her. She looked charming as she came out in the moonlight. That could not be denied. But the staginess of her acting was unbearable, and grew worse as she went on. Her gestures became absurdly artificial. She overemphasized everything that she had to say. The beautiful passage, "Thou knowest the mask of night is on my face, else would a maiden blush bepaint my cheek for that which thou hast heard me speak to-night," was declaimed with the painful precision of a schoolgirl who had been taught to recite by some second-rate professor of elocution. When she leaned over the balcony and came to those wonderful lines, "Although I joy in thee, I have no joy of this contract tonight. It is too rash, too unadvised, too sudden, too like the lightning which doth cease to be ere one can say it lightens. Sweet, good night. This bud of love by summer's ripening breath may prove a beauty's flower when next we meet." She spoke the words as if they conveyed no meaning to her. It was not nervousness. Indeed, so far from being nervous, she seemed absolutely self-contained. It was simply bad art. She was a complete failure. Even the common, uneducated audience of the pit and gallery lost their interest in the play. They got restless and began to talk loudly and to whistle. The Jew manager, who was standing at the back of the dress circle, stamped and swore with rage. The only person unmoved was the girl herself. When the second act was over, there came a storm of hisses, and Lord Henry got up from his chair and put on his coat. "She's quite beautiful, Dorian," he said, "but she can't act. Let us go." "I am going to see the play through," answered the lad in a hard, bitter voice. "I am awfully sorry that I have made you waste an evening, Harry. I apologize to both of you." "My dear Dorian, I should think Miss Vane was ill," interrupted Hallward. "We will come some other night." "I wish she was ill," he rejoined. "But she seems to me to be simply callous and cold. She has entirely altered. Last night, she was a great artist. Tonight she is merely a commonplace, mediocre actress." "Don't talk like that about anyone you love, Dorian. Love is a more wonderful thing than art." "They are both simply forms of imitation," murmured Lord Henry. "But do let us go. Dorian, you must not stay here any longer. It is not good for one's mortals to see bad acting. Besides, I don't suppose you will want your wife to act. So what does it matter if she plays Juliet like a wooden doll? She is very lovely, and if she knows as little about life as she does about acting, she will be a delightful experience. There are only two kinds of people who are really fascinating: people who know absolutely everything and people who know absolutely nothing." "Oh, good heavens, my dear boy, don't look so tragic. The secret of remaining young is never to have an emotion that is unbecoming. Come to the club with Basil and myself. We will smoke cigarettes and drink to the beauty of Sybil Vane. She is beautiful. What more can you want?" "Please go away, Harry," cried the lad. "I really want to be alone." "Basil, you don't mind my asking you to go?" "Can't you see that my heart is breaking?" The hot tears came to his eyes. His lips trembled, and rushing to the back of the box, he leaned up against the wall, hiding his face in his hands. "Let us go, Basil," said Lord Henry, with a strange tenderness in his voice, and the two young men passed out together. A few moments afterwards the footlights flared up, and the curtain rose on the third act. Dorian Gray went back to his seat. He looked pale and proud and indifferent. The play dragged on and seemed interminable. Half the audience went out, tramping in heavy boots and laughing. The whole thing was a fiasco. The last act was played to almost empty benches. As soon as it was over, Dorian Gray rushed behind the scenes into the green room. The girl was standing alone there with a look of triumph on her face. Her eyes were lit with an exquisite fire. There was a radiance about her. Her parted lips were smiling over some secret of their own. When he entered, she looked at him. An expression of infinite joy came over her. "How badly I acted tonight, Dorian!" she cried. "Horribly," he answered, gazing at her in amazement. "Horribly! It was dreadful. Are you ill? You've no idea what it was. You've no idea what I suffered." The girl smiled. "Dorian," she answered, lingering on his name with a long-drawn music in her voice, as though it were sweeter than honey to the red petals of her lips. "Dorian, you should have understood. But you understand now, don't you?" "Understand what?" he asked angrily. "Why I was so bad tonight. Why I shall always be bad. Why I shall never act well again." He shrugged his shoulders. "You are ill, I suppose. When you are ill, you shouldn't act. You make yourself ridiculous. My friends were bored. I was bored." She seemed not to listen to him. She was transfigured with joy. An ecstasy of happiness dominated her. "Dorian, Dorian," she cried. "Before I knew you, acting was the one reality in my life. It was only in the theater that I lived. I thought that it was all true. I was Rosalind one night and Portia the other. The joy of Beatrice was my joy, and the sorrows of Cordelia were mine also. I believed in everything. The common people who acted with me seemed to me to be godlike. The painted scenes were my world. I knew nothing but shadows, and I thought them real. You came, oh, my beautiful love, and you freed my soul from prison. You taught me what reality really is. Tonight, for the first time in my life, I saw through the hollowness, the sham, the silliness of the empty pageant in which I had always played. Tonight, for the first time, I became conscious that the Romeo was hideous and old and painted, that the moonlight in the orchard was false, that the scenery was vulgar, and that the words I had to speak were unreal, were not my words, not what I wanted to say. You had brought me something higher, something of which all art is but a reflection. You have made me understand what love really is. My love, I am sick of shadows. You are more to me than all art can ever be. What have I to do with the puppets of a play? When I came on tonight, I could not understand how it was that everything had gone from me. Suddenly, it dawned on my soul what it all meant. The knowledge was exquisite to me. I heard them hissing, and I smiled. What should they know of love? Take me away, Dorian. Take me away with you, where we can be quite alone. I hate the stage. I might mimic a passion that I do not feel, but I cannot mimic one that burns me like fire. Oh, Dorian, Dorian, you understand now what it all means? Even if I could do it, it would be profanation for me to play at being in love. You have made me see that." He flung himself down on the sofa and turned away his face. "You have killed my love," he muttered. She looked at him in wonder and laughed. He made no answer. She came across to him and stroked his hair with her little fingers. She knelt down and pressed his hands to her lips. He drew them away, and a shudder ran through him. Then he leapt up and went to the door. "Yes," he cried. "You have killed my love. You used to stir my imagination. Now you don't even stir my curiosity. You simply produce no effect. I loved you because you were wonderful, because you had genius and intellect, because you realized the dreams of great poets and gave shape and substance to the shadows of art. You've thrown it all away. You are shallow and stupid. My God, how mad I was to love you! What a fool I have been! You are nothing to me now. I will never see you again. I will never think of you. I will never mention your name. You don't know what you were to me once. Once? Oh, I can't bear to think of it. I wish I'd never laid eyes on you. You have spoiled the romance of my life. How little you can know of love, if you say it mars your art. What are you without your art? Nothing. I would have made you famous, splendid, magnificent. The world would have worshipped you, and you would have belonged to me. What are you now? A third-rate actress with a pretty face." The girl grew white and trembled. She clenched her hands together, and her voice seemed to catch in her throat. "You are not serious, Dorian," she murmured. "You are acting." "Acting? I leave that to you. You do it so well," he answered bitterly. She rose up from her knees and with a piteous expression of pain in her face came across the room to him. She put her hand on his arm and looked into his eyes. He thrust her back. "Don't touch me," he cried. A low moan broke from her, and she flung herself at his feet and lay there like a trampled flower. Dorian, don't leave me," she whispered. I am sorry I didn't act well. I was thinking of you all the time, but I will try. Indeed, I will try. It came so suddenly across me, my love for you. I think I should never have known it if you had not kissed me, if we had not kissed each other. Kiss me again, my love. Don't go away from me. I couldn't bear it. Can you forgive me for tonight? I will work so hard and try to improve. Don't be cruel to me because I love you better than anything in the world. After all, it is only once that I have not pleased you. But you are quite right, Dorian. I should have shown myself more of an artist. It was foolish of me, and yet I couldn't help it. Don't leave me. Don't leave me." A fit of passionate sobbing choked her. She crouched on the floor like a wounded thing, and Dorian Gray, with his beautiful eyes, looked down at her, and his chiseled lips curled in exquisite disdain. There is always something ridiculous about the passions of people whom one has ceased to love. Sybil Vane seemed to him to be absurdly melodramatic. Her tears and sobs annoyed him. "I am going," he said at last in his calm, clear voice. "I don't wish to be unkind, but I can't see you again. You have disappointed me." She wept silently and made no answer, but crept nearer to him. Her little hands stretched blindly out and appeared to be seeking for him. He turned on his heel and left the room. In a few moments, he was out of the theater. Where he went to, he hardly knew. He remembered wandering through dimly lit streets with gaunt, black-shadowed archways and evil-looking houses. Women with hoarse voices and harsh laughter had called after him. Drunkards had reeled by, cursing and chattering to themselves like monstrous apes. He had seen grotesque children huddled upon doorsteps, and had heard shrieks and oaths from gloomy courts. When the dawn was just breaking, he found himself at Covent Garden. Huge carts filled with nodding lilies bumbled slowly down the polished, empty street. The air was heavy with perfume of the flowers, and their beauty seemed to bring him an anodyne for his pain. He followed into the market and watched the men unloading their wagons. A white-smocked carter offered him some cherries. He thanked him, wondered why he refused to accept any money for them, and began to eat them listlessly. They'd been plucked in midnight, and the coldness of the moon had entered into them. A long line of boys carrying crates of stripped tulips and of yellow and red roses defiled in front of him, threading their way through the huge jade-green piles of vegetables. Under the portico, with its gray sun-bleached pillars, loitered a troop of draggled, bare-headed girls, waiting for the auction to be over. After some time, he hailed a hansom and drove home. He was pure opal now, and the roofs of the houses glistened like silver against it. As he was passing through the library towards the door of his bedroom, his eye fell upon the portrait Basil. He started back in surprise, and then went over to it and examined it. In the dim, arrested light that struggled through the cream-colored silk blinds, the face seemed to him to be a little changed. The expression looked different. One would have said there was a touch of cruelty in the mouth. It was certainly curious. He turned around and, walking to the window, drew the blinds up. The bright dawn flooded the room and swept the fantastic shadows into dusky quarters where they lay shuddering. But the strange expression that he had noticed in the face of the portrait seemed to linger there, to be more intensified even. The quivering, ardent sunlight showed the lines of cruelty around the mouth as clearly as if he had been looking into a mirror after he had done some dreadful thing. He winced, and, taking up from the table an oval glass framed in ivory cupids that Lord Henry had given him, he glanced hurriedly into it. No line like that warped his red lips. Well, what did it mean? He rubbed his eyes, came close to the picture, and examined it again. There were no signs of any change when he looked into the actual painting, and yet there was no doubt that the whole expression had altered. It was not a mere fancy of his own. The thing was horribly apparent. He threw himself into a chair and began to think. Suddenly, there flashed across his mind what he had said in Basil Hallward's studio the day the picture had been finished. Yes, he remembered it perfectly. He had uttered a mad wish that he himself might remain young and the portrait grow old, that his own beauty might be untarnished, and the face on the canvas bear the burden of his passions and his sins, that the painted image might be seared with the lines of suffering and thought, and that he might keep all the delicate bloom and loveliness of his then just conscious boyhood. Surely his prayer had not been answered. Such things were impossible. It seemed monstrous to even think of them. And yet there was the picture before him with a touch of cruelty in the mouth. Cruelty? Had he been cruel? It was the girl's fault, not his. He had dreamed of her as a great artist, had given his love to her because he had thought her great. And then she had disappointed him. She had been shallow and unworthy. And yet a feeling of infinite regret came over him, as he thought of her lying at his feet sobbing like a little child. He remembered with what callousness he had watched her. Why had he been made like that? Why had such a soul been given to him? But he suffered also. During the 3 terrible hours that the play lasted, he had lived centuries of pain, aeon upon aeon of torture. His life was well worth hers. She had marred him for a moment, if he wounded her for an age. Besides, women were better suited to bear sorrow than men. They lived on their emotions. They only thought of their emotions. When they took lovers, it was merely to have someone with whom they could have scenes. Lord Henry told him that, and Lord Henry knew what women were. Why should he trouble about Sybil Vane? She was nothing to him now. But the picture. What was he to say of that? It held the secret of his life and told his story. It had taught him to love his own beauty. Would it teach him to loathe his own soul? Would he ever look at it again? No, it was merely an illusion wrought on the troubled senses. The horrible night that he had passed had left phantoms behind it. Suddenly, there had fallen upon his brain that tiny scarlet speck that makes men mad. Picture had not changed. It was folly to think so. Yet it was watching him, with its beautiful marred face and its cruel smile. Its bright hair gleamed in the early sunlight. Its blue eyes met his own. A sense of infinite pity, not for himself, but for the painted image of himself, came over him. It had altered already, and would alter more. Its gold would wither into gray. Its red and white roses would die. For every sin that he committed, a stain would fleck and wreck its fairness. But he would not sin. The picture, changed or unchanged, would be to him the visible emblem of conscience. He would resist temptation. He would not see Lord Henry any more, would not, at any rate, listen to those subtle, poisonous theories that in Basil Hallward's garden had first stirred within him the passion for impossible things. He would go back to Sybil Vane, make her amends, marry her, try to love her again. Yes, it was his duty to do so. She must have suffered more than he did, poor child. He had been selfish and cruel to her. The fascination that she had exercised over him would return. They would be happy together. His life, with her, would be beautiful and pure. He got up from his chair and drew a large screen right in front of the portrait, shuddering as he glanced at it. "How horrible," he murmured to himself, and he walked across to the window and opened it. When he stepped out onto the grass, he drew a deep breath. The fresh morning air seemed to drive away all his somber passions. He thought only of Sybil Vane. A faint echo of his love came back to him. He repeated her name over and over again. The birds that were singing in the dew-drenched garden seemed to be telling the flowers about her. End of Chapter 2.